He dismissed her with a cruel, careless whisper, a judgment that would echo in the silent chambers of her heart. "You're simply too plain to be my wife." Those words, meant to break her instead, ignited a fire. She vanished, swallowed by the shame and the city's indifference. But a year is a long time. Long enough for a forgotten woman to forge herself in the crucible of ambition and revenge. He never saw her coming. He never imagined the woman he discarded would return, not as a ghost of the past, but as the billionaire powerhouse who would stride into his boardroom and buy his entire world. Evelyn Rosier believed in the quiet, steady rhythm of love. She found it in the shared silence of a Sunday morning, the easy laughter over a poorly cooked meal, the comforting weight of Jonathan Devereux's hand in hers. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. Jonathan, a charismatic and ruthlessly ambitious senior vice president at Momentum Corp., a rapidly ascending tech firm in the heart of Seattle. Evelyn, a brilliant but unassuming librarian, her intelligence a gentle, unassuming light rather than a blinding glare. She was the calm harbor to his raging ambition, the soft place for him to land after a day of corporate warfare. Their apartment, a sleek minimalist space in a high-rise that scraped the perpetually grey Seattle sky, was more Jonathan's taste than hers. It was all chrome glass and sharp angles, a testament to a life curated for an audience. Evelyn often felt like a piece of antique furniture accidentally placed in a modern art gallery, valuable but out of place. Her own tastes ran toward worn leather armchairs, the scent of old books, and the chaotic beauty of a well-tended garden. But she loved Jonathan, and so she had folded her own preferences away, tucking them into the quiet corners of her heart. Jonathan was a man who collected beautiful things. A Swiss watch with a dizzying number of complications, a limited edition Italian sports car, and he had once drunkenly confessed to a colleague, a fiancée, who was classic dependable like a vintage Bentley. Evelyn had overheard the comment, and at the time had chosen to interpret it as a compliment. Now she wasn't so sure. The cracks in their carefully constructed facade began to show not as gaping chasms, but as hairline fractures. It was in the way Jonathan's eyes would linger a moment too long on the wives of his colleagues, women draped in designer labels and dripping with diamonds. It was in his gentle yet persistent suggestions for her wardrobe. "Why don't you wear that silk dress I bought you, darling, the red one? You look so vibrant in it." He never said the simple cotton dress you're wearing is too plain, but the implication hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. He began to correct her in public, small, humiliating adjustments. At a cocktail party hosted by Momentum Corp's CEO, she had been passionately discussing a rare manuscript with a professor of literature, only to have Jonathan steer her away with a tight grip on her arm. "Darling," he had whispered, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Mr. Harrison doesn't care about dusty old books. Go talk to his wife about her charity gala." He had then propelled her toward a woman with a face so taut from plastic surgery it looked like a porcelain mask, and left her there. Evelyn had felt a hot flush of shame, not just at the public rebuke, but at the realization that her passions, the very things that made her her, were an embarrassment to him. She was an accessory one that he was finding increasingly ill-suited to the life he was building. The final brutal severance came on a Tuesday evening at Aria, a restaurant so exclusive that reservations were a matter of who you knew, not what you could pay. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and the louder brashness of new tech wealth. It was their anniversary, or so Evelyn had thought. She had worn the red silk dress, styled her honey blonde hair in the sleek chignon he preferred, and even wore the diamond earrings that had felt too ostentatious for her. She had tried for him. Jonathan was tense throughout the meal, his easy charm replaced by a brittle formality. He barely touched his food, his wine, or her hand. When the dessert menus were cleared, he leaned forward, his handsome face a mask of cold resolve. "Evelyn," he began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "We need to talk." A sense of dread, cold and heavy, settled in Evelyn's stomach. "What is it, Jonathan?" "You've been quiet all evening." He sighed, a sound of profound and theatrical weariness. "This isn't working." Evelyn's heart stuttered. "What do you mean? We're getting married in 3 months." He had the grace to look away, his gaze sweeping across the room as if searching for an escape. "I can't marry you, Evelyn." The words were a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. "Why?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there was not sadness or regret, but a chillingly pragmatic cruelty. "Look around you, Ev. Look at the women in this room. They are powerful. They are statements. When a man like me walks into a room, his wife is a reflection of his status, his success. She's the final gleaming piece of the puzzle." He paused, letting the silence stretch a form of torture. "And you, my dear, sweet Evelyn, you're simply too plain to be my wife." "Plain?" The word was a disbelieving echo. It felt absurd, like a line from a bad movie. But the look on his face, the utter sincerity of his callousness, was devastatingly real. "Don't misunderstand," he continued, as if explaining a business deal. "You're a wonderful woman. You're kind, you're intelligent, you're comfortable. But I'm not looking for comfortable anymore. I'm aiming for the stratosphere, and I need a woman who can soar with me, not one who is content to stay on the ground." The humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot wave that washed over her from the tips of her toes to the roots of her hair. The murmur of conversation around them seemed to fade, replaced by a roaring in her ears. She was vaguely aware of people at nearby tables, glancing over their curiosity, piqued by the raw, painful drama unfolding before them. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could do was stare at the man she loved, the man she had been planning to spend her life with, and see a complete stranger. A monster in a bespoke suit. With a trembling hand, she reached up and unclasped the diamond earrings, their weight suddenly unbearable. She placed them carefully on the white linen tablecloth next to her untouched glass of champagne. Then she slipped the engagement ring from her finger. The diamond, a stone he had boasted, was flawless, winked mockingly under the soft restaurant lighting. She placed it beside the earrings. "I see," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her world was shattering into a million pieces. "Thank you for your honesty." She stood up, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't look at him again. She couldn't. She walked out of the restaurant, her head held high, a solitary, dignified figure in a blood-red dress. But the moment the cool night air hit her face, the facade crumbled, and a single hot tear traced a path through her carefully applied makeup. She didn't just walk away from a man that night. She walked away from the woman she had been, a woman who had believed that love was enough. The weeks that followed were a blur of grey, a monochrome existence that mirrored the perpetual drizzle of the Seattle sky. Evelyn moved out of the apartment she had shared with Jonathan in a daze, packing her life into cardboard boxes with a detached efficiency that scared her. Each book, each piece of clothing, each small, cherished trinket was a relic from a life that no longer existed. She left behind everything he had ever given her, from the expensive espresso machine to the cashmere throws. She wanted no ghosts. She found a small, dreary apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, a place with peeling paint and a constant view of a brick wall. It was a fitting backdrop for her mood. The vibrant, loving woman who had meticulously organized library archives and dreamed of a future filled with children's laughter was gone. In her place was a hollowed-out shell, a ghost haunted by 5 simple, brutal words, too plain to be his wife. She quit her job at the library. The quiet, ordered world of books now felt like a mockery. She had lived in stories, believed in happy endings, and her own story had been ripped from her hands, the final pages torn out and set alight. She spent her days in a thick, suffocating fog of grief and humiliation. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. On others, she would walk for hours, aimless and unseen, just another face in the bustling city. The very anonymity a strange sort of comfort. Jonathan. She heard through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances who had chosen their sides with a swift and predictable loyalty was thriving. He was seen with a new woman on his arm, a leggy, raven-haired heiress named Larissa Carrington, whose father owned a string of luxury hotels. Larissa was not plain. She was a statement, a walking, talking billboard for Jonathan's soaring ambition. The news was a fresh twist of the knife in a wound that refused to heal. Evelyn hit rock bottom one rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 months after the breakup. She was sitting on the threadbare carpet of her living room, surrounded by takeout containers, when her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, a Swiss country code. She ignored it. It rang again, and again. On the 5th try, a spark of annoyance, the first real emotion she had felt in weeks, propelled her to answer. "What?" She snapped, her voice rough from disuse. A crisp, authoritative voice, laced with a faint French accent, came through the line. "Evelyn Rosier." "Who is this?" "This is Adelaide. I am the personal assistant to Madame Beaumont. She wishes to speak with you." The name sent a jolt through Evelyn's lethargy. Matilda Beaumont, her maternal grandmother, a woman she hadn't seen since she was a child, a figure spoken of in hushed, almost mythical terms by her late mother. Matilda was the black sheep of the family, the one who had eschewed a quiet life in America for the cutthroat world of European finance. She was rumored to be formidable eccentric and obscenely wealthy. They had exchanged polite, impersonal Christmas cards, but nothing more. "My grandmother," Evelyn asked, bewildered. "How did she get this number?" "Madame Beaumont can acquire anything she wishes," Adelaide replied, a hint of dry amusement in her tone. "Please hold." There was a click and then a new voice, older, but with the same sharp, decisive edge, filled the line. "Evelyn, it has been a long time." "Grandmother Matilda." "The very same. I have heard about your recent unpleasantness." Evelyn flinched. The thought of this powerful, distant woman, knowing the sordid details of her humiliation, was mortifying. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice cracking. "No, you are not," Matilda stated not unkindly. "You are wallowing. And while a brief period of wallowing is understandable, prolonged submersion in self-pity is a luxury no woman of my bloodline can afford. Your mother, bless her gentle soul, would have written a sad poem about it. I, on the other hand, prefer action." Evelyn was speechless. "I have a proposition for you." Matilda continued, her voice brisk and businesslike. "Your mother always told me you had a first-class mind, a mind for patterns and details wasted on cataloguing dusty books. I am offering you a chance to use it. I am offering you an education." "An education," Evelyn repeated dumbly. "The kind you won't find in any university. I will teach you about money, about power, about how the world really works. I will teach you how to build an empire from the ashes of your old life. But it will not be easy. You will work harder than you have ever worked before. You will leave behind this dreary, rain-soaked city and the ghost of the little man who hurt you. You will come to Geneva. You will live with me. You will become my protégé." The offer was so outlandish, so unexpected, that it felt like a dream. Geneva, a world away from the suffocating memories of Seattle. "Why?" Evelyn whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" There was a pause, and for the first time a hint of something softer entered the older woman's voice. "Because you are my granddaughter, and because the best revenge is not a life lived in sorrow, but one of spectacular, undeniable success. Now pack your bags. A private jet will be waiting for you at Boeing Field in 2 days. Adelaide will send you the details. Do not be late." The line went dead. Evelyn stared at her phone, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of hope. It was insane. It was impossible. But it was also a lifeline, a hand reaching down into the dark pit she had fallen into. For 2 days, she wrestled with the decision. Part of her, the old Evelyn, was terrified. She was a librarian, not a corporate raider. She knew about the Dewey Decimal System, not the stock market. But another part of her, a part she hadn't known existed, was intrigued. The thought of leaving it all behind, of shedding her old skin, was seductive. The thought of proving Jonathan and the world wrong was a powerful motivator. On the morning of the flight, she looked at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy. She looked plain. The word echoed in her mind. Jonathan's voice, a cruel taunt. With a sudden surge of resolve, she picked up a pair of scissors and with a few ragged, decisive snips, cut her long, honey-blonde hair into a short, jagged crop. It was a clumsy, uneven cut, but it was a start, a severing of the past. When she stepped onto the tarmac at Boeing Field and saw the sleek, white Gulfstream jet waiting, she felt a thrill of fear and exhilaration. She was leaving Evelyn Rosier behind in the Seattle rain. A new woman was about to be forged in the fire of her grandmother's world, a woman who would be anything but plain. As the jet climbed into the clouds, leaving the grey city far below, she didn't look back. She was flying toward a new life, a new identity, and a future she could never have imagined. Her transformation had begun. Geneva was a world of crisp air, old money, and unspoken power. Matilda Beaumont's villa, perched on the shores of Lake Geneva with a staggering view of the Alps, was less a home and more a fortress of quiet, opulent influence. It was a place of polished marble, priceless art, and a library that made Evelyn's former workplace look like a children's pop-up book. The woman herself was even more formidable than her voice on the phone. Matilda was in her late 70s, but possessed a vitality that would exhaust a woman half her age. With piercing blue eyes, a mane of silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, and a wardrobe of impeccably tailored pantsuits, she was the epitome of European chic and ruthless efficiency. She did not coddle Evelyn. There were no gentle words of comfort, no hand-holding through her grief. Instead, she handed Evelyn a stack of financial reports on her first night and said, "Read these. We will discuss them at 6 a.m. The first few months were brutal. Evelyn was thrown into the deep end of a world she didn't understand. She learned about leveraged buyouts, futures trading, and forensic accounting. Her days were a grueling marathon of lessons with private tutors, economists, and lawyers, hand-picked by Matilda. Her nights were spent poring over market analyses and corporate histories until the words blurred into a meaningless jumble. She was running on caffeine and sheer stubborn will. Matilda was a demanding, often merciless teacher. She dissected Evelyn's every weakness, every hesitation. Sentiment is a liability in business. Evelyn, she would say, her voice sharp as splintered ice, you must learn to separate emotion from calculation. Your heart is for your private life. Your head is for the battlefield. Slowly, painstakingly, a change began to occur. The intellectual challenge, the sheer volume of new information, began to crowd out the persistent looping memory of Jonathan's cruelty. The mind that had once delighted in tracing the provenance of a rare book now found a new exhilarating thrill in tracing the flow of capital, in identifying the weaknesses in a company's balance sheet, in predicting market trends. She was good at it, terrifyingly good. The physical transformation followed the intellectual one. Matilda sent her to the best hairdressers, couturiers, and personal trainers in Europe. Her choppy, grief-stricken haircut was styled into a sharp, sophisticated bob that framed a face that had grown leaner, more angular. The soft, comfortable clothes she had favored were replaced with a wardrobe of bespoke power suits, elegant silk blouses, and dresses that were both feminine and formidable. She learned to walk in heels that could double as weapons to command a room with her posture to meet a man's gaze with unwavering confidence. She was no longer Evelyn Rosier, the gentle librarian. At her grandmother's insistence, she adopted a new name for her new life. She became Eva Beaumont. Evelyn is the girl who was broken, Matilda had explained. Eva is the woman who will do the breaking. After a year of relentless training, Matilda deemed her ready. She didn't offer praise, but instead a new challenge. "It is time to build your own legacy," she announced one morning over breakfast. She presented Eva with a portfolio. Matilda had established a new investment firm, Phoenix Capital, and had seeded it with a substantial but not unlimited amount of her own money. Eva was to be its CEO. "This is your company," Matilda said, her blue eyes sharp and appraising. "Succeed, and you will have an empire. Fail, and you will have learned a very expensive lesson." Eva felt a familiar thrill of fear, but this time it was laced with a heady dose of excitement. Phoenix Capital was hers. Her first move was audacious. She targeted a struggling German robotics company, Cyberkinetic, a firm with brilliant engineers but disastrous management. The market had written it off as a lost cause. But Eva, poring over their patents and research papers, saw what others had missed: a revolutionary AI technology that was years ahead of its time. She executed a swift, clean acquisition, using a strategy so clever and aggressive that it sent ripples through the European financial community. Then she went to work. She fired the entire old guard of management, promoted the young, innovative engineers who had been stifled by the previous leadership, and poured resources into their research and development. Within 6 months, Cyberkinetic unveiled a new line of automated surgical robots that were a quantum leap forward in medical technology. The company's value skyrocketed. Eva had turned a €10 million investment into a €500 million asset. The name Eva Beaumont began to be whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in the boardrooms of London, Paris, and Frankfurt. She was the mysterious new player, the prodigy with the Midas touch. No one knew where she had come from. Her past was a carefully guarded secret. It was during this meteoric rise that she met Sébastien Dubois. He was not a financier or a CEO, but a distinguished art historian and the owner of a prestigious gallery in Zurich. They met at a charity auction where Phoenix Capital was a major sponsor. Sébastien was intelligent, cultured, and had a quiet, self-assured presence that was the antithesis of Jonathan's brash arrogance. He wasn't impressed by her wealth or her growing power. He was captivated by her mind, by the passion with which she discussed a Degas sculpture, by the flicker of the old Evelyn that still existed beneath the polished, formidable exterior of Eva Beaumont. He saw the woman, not the balance sheet. Their courtship was a slow, elegant dance. He introduced her to a world of art, music, and literature, parts of herself she had thought long dead. With him she could laugh, she could be vulnerable, she could take off the armor she wore for the rest of the world. He loved her for her strength, but also for her scars. He loved Eva, but he also sensed the shadow of Evelyn, and he loved her too. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of his Zurich apartment, looking out at the glittering city lights, he turned to her. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes when you look at a painting, you see the faint outlines of an earlier work beneath the surface. It's called pentimento. It doesn't detract from the final masterpiece. It adds depth, a story. I see that in you." Tears welled in Eva's eyes, the first she had shed for herself in a very long time. In that moment, she knew she had found a love that was real, a love that saw all of her, the broken pieces and the triumphant whole. But even as she built this new happy life, a part of her remained tethered to the past. She followed the news from Seattle, a quiet, obsessive ritual. She watched as Momentum Corp, Jonathan's company, began to falter. A series of risky, ill-advised acquisitions championed by the ever-ambitious Jonathan Devereux had backfired spectacularly. The company's stock was plummeting. They were bleeding money vulnerable. A cold, hard resolve settled in Eva's heart. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about closing a circle. It was about proving to herself once and for all that the plain, gentle woman he had discarded was more of a titan than he could ever hope to be. She called a meeting with her top analysts at Phoenix Capital. As she strode into the boardroom, a sleek, formidable figure in a dark blue Armani suit, she felt a sense of destiny. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice ringing with quiet authority, "our next target is an American tech firm. It's called Momentum Corp." The first tremor hit Momentum Corp on a Monday morning. It arrived not as a dramatic announcement, but as a quiet, insidious ripple in the stock market. An unknown entity operating through a series of shell corporations and a fiercely anonymous investment firm named Phoenix Capital had begun aggressively buying up Momentum's shares. Jonathan Devereux, now executive vice president and heir apparent to the CEO's throne, initially dismissed it. "It's just an arbitrage play," he assured the nervous board members. "Some vulture fund sees our depressed stock price and thinks they can make a quick buck. They'll get bored and move on." But Phoenix Capital did not get bored. The buying continued relentless and methodical. The volume of shares being acquired was staggering far beyond a simple arbitrage play. This was a calculated, well-funded assault. Panic began to creep into the hushed, wood-paneled boardroom of Momentum Corp. "Who the hell is Phoenix Capital?" demanded Robert Henderson, the aging, increasingly flustered CEO. "Get our people on it. I want a name. I want to know who we're fighting." The problem was, no one could find a name. Phoenix Capital was a ghost. It was registered in Switzerland with a labyrinthine corporate structure that was all but impenetrable. The financial world was buzzing with speculation. The name on everyone's lips was Eva Beaumont, the firm's mysterious reclusive CEO, a financial wunderkind who had appeared out of nowhere and laid waste to her competition. But she was a phantom. Her photograph never published her personal history, a complete blank. For Jonathan, the situation was becoming a personal nightmare. The failed acquisitions that had weakened Momentum Corp had been his pet projects. He had pushed them through the board with his signature charm and bluster, promising exponential growth. Now that same ambition was being used as a weapon against him, the company's vulnerability a direct result of his hubris. His credibility was shot, and Robert Henderson's gaze had turned from paternal approval to icy disappointment. His fiancée, Larissa Carrington, was also feeling the pressure. Her affection, Jonathan was beginning to realize, was directly correlated to his net worth and social standing. "Daddy says you're in trouble," she'd said to him over dinner, her tone more accusatory than concerned. "He says this Eva Beaumont woman is going to eat you for breakfast. It's all terribly embarrassing." The pressure mounted with each passing day. Phoenix Capital's stake grew from 5% to 10% to a terrifying 25%. They were no longer just a major shareholder. They were on the cusp of initiating a hostile takeover. Frantic Jonathan and the board tried to open a dialogue. Their calls and emails to Phoenix Capital were met with a wall of polite, impenetrable silence from a gatekeeper named Adelaide. Their offers of a meeting were consistently coolly rebuffed. "Ms. Beaumont will engage when she deems it appropriate," was the only response they ever received. The facelessness of their opponent was unnerving. Eva Beaumont became a bogeyman in the Momentum Corp offices, a name whispered in hushed, fearful tones. They imagined her as a ruthless old dragon, a corporate predator who had been circling them for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jonathan became obsessed. He spent sleepless nights trying to piece together the puzzle of Eva Beaumont. Who was she? Where did she come from? What did she want? He felt a strange, unsettling sense of being watched, of being outmaneuvered by an intelligence that was always 2 steps ahead. One evening, after another grueling, fruitless day, he was clearing out some old files from his desk when he came across a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, was the engagement ring he had given to Evelyn. She had left it on the table at Aria, and in a moment of, he wasn't sure what, he had pocketed it. He had never thrown it away. He stared at the flawless diamond, and for the first time in a long time, he thought of her. He remembered her quiet intelligence, her gentle nature, the way she could calm his frantic energy with just a touch. He felt a fleeting, unfamiliar pang of something that might have been regret. He wondered what had become of her. She had simply vanished. No one he knew had heard from her in over a year. He felt a brief, selfish flicker of concern quickly extinguished by the more pressing matter of his own impending doom. He tossed the box back in the drawer and slammed it shut. The final blow came in the form of a legally mandated public filing. Phoenix Capital, having crossed the 30% ownership threshold, officially declared its intention to acquire a controlling stake in Momentum Corp. They called for an emergency board meeting to vote on a new leadership structure. Their proposal was simple and brutal: the complete dissolution of the current board and the installation of Eva Beaumont as the new CEO. The meeting was set for the following Friday. It was an ultimatum. The ghost was no longer content to haunt the machine. She was coming to possess it. The week leading up to the meeting was a blur of frantic, desperate activity. Momentum Corp's lawyers tried to find a legal loophole, a poison pill defense to thwart the takeover. Their bankers scrambled to find a white knight, a friendly company to acquire them instead. But it was too little too late. Phoenix Capital's position was too strong, their pockets too deep. Jonathan felt like a condemned man. His career, his reputation, his carefully constructed life of wealth and status were all about to be obliterated by a woman he had never even met. On the eve of the meeting, he stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, the same office where he had once dreamed of ruling his own empire, and looked down at the city lights. He felt a profound, chilling sense of dread. The hunter had become the prey, and tomorrow he would finally come face to face with the woman who held his entire future in her hands. He just wished he knew who she was. The boardroom at Momentum Corp was a tomb of hushed anxiety. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members, a gallery of men who had until a few weeks ago considered themselves masters of the universe. Robert Henderson sat at the head of the table, his face ashen, his usual robust confidence completely gone. Jonathan sat to his right, his stomach a tight knot of dread. He had straightened his tie a dozen times, but still felt as if he were suffocating. They were all waiting for the arrival of the phantom Eva Beaumont, the architect of their destruction. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness. At precisely 10 a.m., the double doors to the boardroom swung open. A woman stood silhouetted in the doorway. She was flanked by two stern-looking lawyers, but it was the woman herself who commanded the absolute undivided attention of everyone in the room. She was tall and slender, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that was a masterpiece of understated power. Her dark blonde hair was cut in a sharp, elegant bob that framed a face of striking, angular beauty. Her eyes, a cool, piercing blue, swept across the room, missing nothing. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, her heels clicking with quiet authority on the marble floor. There was a collective intake of breath. This was not the old, haggard corporate raider they had imagined. This was a woman in her prime, radiating an aura of untouchable confidence and lethal intelligence. But as she stepped further into the light, Jonathan felt a dizzying wave of disbelief, a sense of reality warping and twisting into something impossible. He knew that face. He knew the elegant column of her neck, the determined set of her jaw, the way her eyes, though now colder and harder, seemed to look right through him. The blood drained from his face. His heart hammered against his ribs. It couldn't be. The woman walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, directly facing the CEO. She placed a sleek leather portfolio on the table and looked directly at Robert Henderson. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice smooth and clear, with a faint, unplaceable European accent. "I am Eva Beaumont." A stunned, disbelieving silence filled the room. Jonathan could only stare, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Evelyn. It was Evelyn. But it wasn't. This woman was a stranger, a powerful, intimidating creature who wore Evelyn's face like a mask. The gentle, unassuming librarian was gone, replaced by this titaness. Robert Henderson, flustered, finally found his voice. "Miss Beaumont, we were not expecting—" "I am aware," she interrupted, her tone cutting through his stammering. "You were expecting someone you could intimidate, perhaps. Someone you could buy off. I can assure you I am neither." Her gaze then moved down the table, pausing for a fraction of a second on each board member, before finally landing on Jonathan. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was something far more chilling, a cool, detached recognition, as if she were looking at a mildly interesting but ultimately insignificant specimen under a microscope. Jonathan felt his world tilt on its axis. "Evelyn." He whispered the name, a ragged, incredulous sound in the silent room. Her lips curved into a faint, ironic smile. "I believe the woman you are referring to no longer exists. You saw to that." The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Board members exchanged stunned, confused glances. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just a hostile takeover. This was personal. Eva Beaumont, Evelyn Rosier, stood up and walked to the head of the table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word she spoke was a hammer blow delivered with calm surgical precision. "For the past year," she began, her eyes sweeping over the stunned faces, "you have all been wondering who was dismantling your company from the outside. The answer is simple. It was the woman, your executive vice president." She gestured dismissively toward Jonathan, "deemed too plain to be a part of his world." A gasp went around the table. All eyes turned to Jonathan, whose face had crumpled into a mask of abject horror and shame. "He told me I was not a statement," she continued, her voice dripping with icy contempt, "that I was not a reflection of success. He was right in a way. I was not a reflection of his kind of success, which, as your current stock price demonstrates, is built on arrogance, poor judgment, and a foundation of glittering superficiality." She began to pace slowly behind the board members, her presence a palpable force. Jonathan's fatal flaw, both in his personal life and his business dealings, is that he is incapable of seeing the value beneath a plain surface. He is seduced by shiny objects. She ticked off the points on her fingers. The disastrous acquisition of Sparklight, a company with a flashy marketing campaign, but no viable product. The ill-advised merger with Innovatech, which had a charismatic CEO but crippling debt. He didn't do his due diligence. He didn't look at the fundamentals. He saw a pretty package and he bought it. And in doing so, he has run this company into the ground. She stopped directly behind Jonathan's chair. He could feel the heat of her presence, smell the faint, expensive scent of her perfume. He flinched, as if she had physically touched him. "And just as he misjudged those companies," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "for his ears only, he misjudged me." She then addressed the entire room again, her voice ringing with power. "You are all here today because you have a choice to make. You can continue with the leadership that has brought you to the brink of ruin, a leadership that values appearance over substance. Or you can vote for a new direction, one that is built on intelligent strategy and a ruthless focus on genuine value." She returned to her seat, a queen returning to her throne. "I am not here to ask for your company. I am here to inform you that I am taking it. Phoenix Capital now controls 38% of the voting shares. I have already secured the proxy votes of 3 of your largest institutional investors who have, shall we say, lost faith in current management. That brings my controlling interest to 52%. The vote is a formality, but let's have it anyway. All in favor of the motion to dissolve the current board and install Eva Beaumont as CEO, signify by saying aye." One by one, like dominoes falling, the hands went up. The ayes were spoken, some eagerly, some with grim resignation. It was a complete and total victory. Finally, Eva Beaumont's gaze settled on Jonathan once more. The cool detachment was gone, replaced by a look of final utter dismissal. "Mr. Devereux," she said, the formal address, a deliberate final twist of the knife. "You are fired. Please have your personal effects cleared from your office by the end of the day. Security will escort you out." It was over. In the space of 15 minutes, the woman he had discarded, the woman he had humiliated, had returned and systematically, brilliantly, and ruthlessly taken everything from him. His job, his power, his reputation, his future. All of it gone. As two security guards approached him, Jonathan could only stare at the magnificent, terrifying woman at the head of the table. He had wanted a wife who was a statement, and in the end, he had gotten one. She was a statement of his own utter, catastrophic failure. The fallout from Eva Beaumont's spectacular corporate coup was swift and brutal. The business world was electrified by the story. The tale of the spurned lover returning as a billionaire to dethrone her former fiancé was the kind of real-life soap opera that journalists and market analysts dream of. Eva Beaumont was no longer a mysterious phantom. She was a legend. Her face was on the cover of Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and Fortune. The narrative, however, was not one of a scorned woman's revenge, but of a brilliant strategist's triumph. The personal history was the hook, but the story was her undeniable business acumen. For Jonathan Devereux, the fallout was a personal apocalypse. Being escorted out of the Momentum Corp building, his belongings in a cardboard box, was the beginning of a dizzying, humiliating downward spiral. The security guards were impassive, but he could feel the eyes of his former colleagues on him, a mixture of pity schadenfreude and fear. He had been a king in this building. Now he was nothing. His name was toxic. No reputable firm in Seattle, or anywhere else for that matter, would touch him. He was the man who had not only run a promising company into the ground, but had also created his own corporate nemesis through an act of breathtaking personal cruelty. He was a cautionary tale, a punchline at cocktail parties. The life he had so carefully constructed crumbled around him. Larissa Carrington, his statement fiancée, left him within a week. There was no dramatic confrontation. She simply had her assistant call his assistant, except he no longer had an assistant, to inform him that the engagement was off, and that she would be returning the ring. When he tried to call her, he found his number had been blocked. Her father, the hotel magnate, had no use for a disgraced, unemployed pariah. His fair-weather friends, the ones who had flocked to his side when he was the rising star at Momentum Corp, vanished. His calls went unanswered, his texts unread. The invitations to exclusive parties and golf games dried up. He was a pariah, cast out from the gilded world he had worshipped. Forced to sell his sports car and his oversized minimalist apartment to cover his mounting legal fees and living expenses, he moved into a small generic rental that felt like a prison cell. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, oppressive blanket, broken only by the relentless loop of his own thoughts, the image of Eva, powerful and remote in the boardroom, the echo of her voice saying, "You are fired," the memory of her face, the face he had once called plain, now adorning the covers of magazines he could no longer afford to buy. Desperation gnawed at him. He began to drink heavily the expensive single malt whiskies of his former life, replaced by cheap bourbon that burned its way down his throat. One night, fueled by alcohol and a pathetic, desperate hope, he went to the new headquarters of Phoenix Capital, the very building that had once been Momentum Corp's. He waited in the lobby, a shambling, unshaven wreck of his former self, until he saw her leaving for the evening. She was with a man, a handsome, distinguished-looking man, who looked at her with an expression of genuine adoration. It was Sébastien Dubois. They were laughing about something, and the sound of her easy, happy laughter was a dagger in Jonathan's chest. He stumbled forward, calling her name. "Evelyn, please, I need to talk to you." Eva stopped, her smile fading as she saw him. Sebastian put a protective arm around her. Her security detail moved forward, but she held up a hand to stop them. She looked at Jonathan, her expression not one of anger, but of a weary, distant pity. "There is nothing for us to talk about, Jonathan. Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. For everything. I was a fool, an arrogant, blind fool. I see that now. I still love you." The lie was so transparent, so pathetic, that Ava almost laughed. "No, you don't," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You don't love me. You love what I have. You love the power, the success. It's the same ambition that drove you to discard me, and it's the same ambition that drives you to crawl back to me now. The only thing that has changed is the object of your desire." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "Let me be perfectly clear. I am not the cure for your failure. I am the consequence of it. You built this life for yourself, Jonathan. Now you must live in it." Tears streamed down his face, mingling with the stubble on his cheeks. "Give me another chance. I can change. I can be the man you deserve." She shook her head slowly. "The man I deserve is standing right here," she said, glancing warmly at Sebastian. "The woman you threw away is gone. I am Ava Beaumont, and Ava Beaumont does not look back." With that she turned and walked away, her arm linked with Sebastian's. She didn't grant him a single backward glance. The glass doors of the building slid shut behind her, leaving Jonathan alone on the cold pavement, a ghost of a man haunted by the empire of the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. He had lost everything, not just his job and his fortune, but the last desperate chance to rewrite his own pathetic ending. He was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own ambition. The woman who walked into the old Momentum Corp headquarters the morning after the takeover was not the same woman who had been escorted out of it in disgrace. Ava Beaumont did not come to gloat over the ruins of the old regime. She came to build. Her victory had not been an end, but a beginning. Her first act as CEO was not to fire en masse as many had feared, but to listen. She held town hall meetings with employees from every department, from the coders in the basement to the marketing team on the top floor. She walked the halls, her presence initially intimidating, but her genuine interest soon put people at ease. She didn't want to hear sycophantic praise. She wanted to hear the truth. What was working? What was broken? Who were the hidden talents, the brilliant minds stifled by the previous administration's focus on politics and appearances? She discovered a company culture rife with fear and insecurity, where innovation had been sacrificed for short-term gains and flashy presentations. She found engineers who were frustrated, designers who were uninspired, and a sales team that had been forced to push products they didn't believe in. With the same surgical precision she had used to acquire the company, Eva began to transform it. She gutted the bloated upper management, the cronies of Jonathan and Henderson, who had gotten their positions through loyalty rather than merit. In their place, she promoted from within, identifying the bright, passionate employees who had been overlooked. A young female engineer with revolutionary ideas for sustainable tech was made the new head of R&D. A quiet but brilliant data analyst was given control of market strategy. She renamed the company Nexus Innovations, a name that spoke of connection of the future of a new nexus between technology and humanity. She redirected the company's focus away from Jonathan's ill-fated superficial ventures and toward meaningful long-term projects. The company began investing heavily in green technology and educational software for underserved communities, and in the medical robotics division she had brought with her from her first major success with cyberkinetic. Morale, which had been at rock bottom, began to soar. People were excited to come to work again. The atmosphere changed from one of fear to one of collaboration and genuine innovation. Nexus Innovations wasn't just profitable. It was a place with a purpose. Ava Beaumont wasn't just a CEO. She was a leader. Her personal life flourished in a way she had never thought possible. Her relationship with Sebastian was a sanctuary of peace and equality. He was her partner in every sense of the word, celebrating her triumphs, supporting her through challenges, and reminding her of the woman she was beyond the boardroom. They traveled, they collected art, they hosted intimate dinners with friends, academics, artists, and scientists, a far cry from the shallow socialites of Jonathan's world. Her bond with her grandmother Matilda deepened into a partnership of mutual respect and genuine affection. The formidable old woman, who had forged her into a weapon, now reveled in her granddaughter's success not just as a businesswoman, but as a person. "You have your mother's heart, after all," Matilda admitted to her one day, the highest compliment she could bestow. "You have simply encased it in Valyrian steel." One crisp autumn evening, about a year after the takeover, Ava stood in her office, the same office where Jonathan had once stood, dreaming of a shallow empire. The city lights of Seattle glittered below, no longer a backdrop for pain and humiliation, but a testament to her journey. She wasn't looking at the city as a conqueror, but as an architect. She wasn't just the billionaire who had bought his company. She was the visionary who had rebuilt it, making it stronger, more ethical, and more successful than it had ever been. Sebastian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About Pentimento," she replied, leaning back against him. "About the faint outlines of the past." She thought of Evelyn Rosier, the quiet librarian who loved books and believed in a simple kind of love. She was not a ghost to be exorcised, but a fundamental part of the masterpiece she had become. The pain of her past had not been erased, but it had been integrated, transformed into the source of her strength, her empathy, her drive to build something of true and lasting value. She had not sought revenge in the end. She had sought self-actualization, and in doing so had achieved the most profound victory of all. She had not destroyed Jonathan Devereux's world. She had simply built one of her own that was so vast, so brilliant, so meaningful that his tiny, cruel kingdom had simply ceased to matter. Her happiness was not a reaction to his betrayal, but a creation of her own making, built on the solid ground of integrity, purpose, and a love that saw and cherished every layer of her soul. The story was not about him at all anymore. It was, and always had been, about her. And there you have it, a story of betrayal, transformation, and ultimate triumph. Evelyn's journey from a heartbroken librarian to the formidable Eva Beaumont reminds us that our greatest strength can be forged in the fires of our deepest pain. It's a powerful lesson that our value is not determined by how others see us, but by how we choose to see ourselves. If you were captivated by Eva's incredible story of resilience and empowerment, don't forget to hit that like button to show your support. What was your favorite twist in the story? Let us know in the comments below. And for more compelling stories of real-life drama and inspiring transformations, make sure you share this video with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next chapter we have in store for you. Thanks for listening.